The cold brass casing rolled across the school roof, but the real danger was the scope. Sarah stood perfectly still, letting the biting November wind whip through her conservative, beige cardigan. To the students of Oak Creek High, she was Ms. Jenkins, the painfully quiet history teacher who preferred grading essays on the French Revolution over attending Friday night football games. She was the teacher who never raised her voice, the one whose classroom was a sanctuary of silence and dusty textbooks. But as her eyes tracked the trajectory of the brass casing, the carefully constructed facade of Ms. Jenkins melted away, replaced by the dormant, hypervigilant instincts of an operative who had spent her 20s in theaters of operation most people only saw in classified congressional briefings. She hadn't come to the roof looking for trouble. She had noticed a strange, rhythmic flashing against the asphalt of the faculty parking lot during her fifth period planning block. A reflection, too consistent to be a piece of broken glass caught in the breeze, and too high up to be a student's forgotten phone. It was the distinct, telltale glint of a multi-coated optical lens catching the afternoon sun. She had waited until the final bell rang, until the cacophony of slamming lockers and roaring school buses faded into the distance, before slipping through the purportedly locked maintenance door on the fourth floor. The standard-issue deadbolt had taken her precisely 4 seconds to bypass with a tension wrench and a rake pick she kept hidden in the spine of a leather-bound planner. Now, standing on the sprawling, tar-papered expanse of the roof, surrounded by the hum of massive HVAC units, she found the source of the reflection. It was a sniper's nest. It wasn't a makeshift fort built by rebellious teenagers smoking cigarettes. It was a professionally constructed observation post. Sarah dropped into a low crouch, moving with a silent, fluid grace that would have shocked her colleagues. She approached the setup, her eyes scanning the perimeter for tripwires or pressure plates out of sheer habit. The nest was nestled perfectly between 2 industrial ventilation shafts, shielding it from view from the ground and any surrounding higher buildings. She knelt beside the equipment. Someone had hauled up heavy sandbags, not the cheap plastic kind, but military-grade burlap, filled with dry, sifted soil to absorb recoil and provide a stable resting platform. The bags were arranged in a perfect U-shape. Resting in the center of the depression wasn't a rifle, but a piece of equipment that chilled Sarah's blood far more than a weapon would have. It was a high-end, digital spotting scope, wired directly into a closed-network transmission pack. She examined the scope without touching it. The lens cap was off, which explained the glare she had seen. It was angled precisely downward, pointing toward the interior courtyard of the school. Sarah moved her head, tracing the invisible line of sight from the scope's objective lens down to the courtyard. The scope wasn't aimed at the student hangout spots. It was aimed directly at the expansive, floor-to-ceiling windows of the principal's office. Principal Miller's office was soundproofed, a point of pride for the administration, ensuring privacy for sensitive parent-teacher meetings. But with a scope this powerful, sound didn't matter. The magnification was more than sufficient to read lips. It was enough to read the text on documents lying flat on the principal's desk. Sarah's mind raced, processing the implications at a tactical speed she hadn't utilized in years. Someone was conducting high-level surveillance on the administration of a public high school in suburban Ohio. Why? The school was notoriously underfunded, plagued by minor disciplinary issues, but it was miles away from any military installations, federal buildings, or corporate headquarters. There was nothing here worth the cost of this equipment, let alone the risk of setting it up. She shifted her attention to the brass casing by her boot. She picked it up with a gloved hand. It was a 9mm shell, cold and empty. But there was no firearm in the nest. The casing hadn't been fired here. It had been dropped, likely by accident, a remnant of a sidearm the watcher carried for personal protection. The watcher was armed, trained, and highly organized. A sudden sharp metallic click echoed from the access stairwell behind her. Sarah froze. The heavy steel door leading back into the school, the one she had carefully pushed shut to avoid a draft, was opening. The rusted hinges shrieked in protest against the cold air. Sarah didn't panic. Panic was a luxury afforded to civilians. She immediately assessed her cover options. The HVAC units offered concealment but limited mobility. The edge of the roof offered a blind drop of 50 feet. She opted for the shadowed recess behind the main exhaust manifold, a cramped space that smelled heavily of ozone and decaying leaves. She slipped into the shadows, pressing her back against the cold, vibrating metal of the machinery, controlling her breathing, slowing her heart rate until the pounding in her ears faded into a dull, rhythmic thrum. Footsteps crunched against the gravelly tar paper. They were heavy, deliberate, and paced with a confident stride. Not the erratic, shuffling walk of a student. These were the measured steps of someone who knew exactly where they were going and what they were doing. From her narrow vantage point, Sarah caught a glimpse of a dark, weather-resistant jacket. The figure moved toward the sniper's nest, knelt down, and swiftly capped the scope's lens. The watcher had returned. Sarah's eyes narrowed, capturing every detail of the person's profile as they turned slightly to inspect the sandbags. The jawline was sharp, the posture rigid. It was someone she recognized. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, threatening to shatter the calm exterior she had maintained for the last half-decade. The watcher wasn't a stranger. It was a member of the Oak Creek High faculty, and the school was a much darker place than anyone realized. Sarah remained frozen against the vibrating metal of the exhaust manifold, the chill of the steel seeping through her cardigan. Her eyes, trained for years to operate in low-light, high-stress environments, remained locked on the figure securing the observation post. It was Mr. Davis, the school's beloved guidance counselor. The same Mr. Davis who wore slightly oversized, colorful sweaters, who kept a bowl of Jolly Ranchers on his desk, and who possessed a seemingly infinite patience for the angst of teenagers. Yet, here he was on the restricted roof, moving with a crisp, tactical efficiency that completely contradicted his affable, bumbling persona. He quickly disconnected the transmission pack, coiled the cables with precise, alternating loops to prevent tangling, and stowed the gear into a nondescript, black canvas duffel bag. Sarah mentally cross-referenced this new data point. Davis had been at Oak Creek for 3 years. His file, which she had casually reviewed out of sheer habit when she was hired, stated he had a background in social work and a degree from a mid-tier state university. There was no mention of military service, private security work, or intelligence training. The way he handled the high-tech surveillance gear, the silent movements, the situational awareness as he scanned the horizon before descending, screamed of advanced training. The file was a fabrication. She knew a constructed legend when she saw one. She had lived under several herself. Davis hoisted the duffel bag over his shoulder and moved back toward the access door. He didn't look back. The rusted hinges screeched again, followed by the heavy thud of the door closing and the definitive click of the deadbolt sliding into place. Sarah waited a full 3 minutes, counting the seconds internally, before stepping out from the shadows. The roof was empty, the wind howling louder now as the sun dipped below the tree line, casting the school grounds in long, eerie shadows. She walked over to the spot where the nest had been. Davis had been thorough, but nobody was perfect. In his haste to secure the equipment after realizing he had left the lens cap off, he had disturbed the layer of grime on the roof. She knelt and inspected the area. Beside the indentation where the sandbags had rested, a small, silver object caught her eye. It was a specialized encrypted thumb drive, the kind used for secure, offline data transfer, robust enough to withstand being dropped or submerged. It must have fallen from a pocket or a pouch when he knelt. Using the edge of her cardigan, she carefully picked it up and slipped it into her pocket. This was physical evidence, a thread she could pull. Her mind immediately shifted to the next phase, extraction and analysis. She couldn't use the main roof access door. Davis might have set a telltale on the lock, a simple trick like a piece of thread or graphite powder to see if it was opened again. Instead, she moved to the eastern edge of the roof, above the old gymnasium. The architecture here was older, featuring a series of sturdy, brick decorative pillars and a robust rain gutter system. With a practiced ease that would have terrified the school administration, Sarah swung her legs over the parapet. She found a foothold on a protruding brick, gripped the edge of the gutter bracket, and began a swift, silent descent. Her muscles, though out of practice, remembered the routine. She dropped the last 10 feet into the soft, unkempt bushes behind the gym, rolling to absorb the impact and instantly returning to her feet. She brushed the dirt from her skirt, adjusted her glasses, and instantly transformed back into the timid Ms. Jenkins. The school interior was eerily quiet, the fluorescent lights buzzing with a sterile, flickering energy. She walked the hallways with her head down, clutching a stack of ungraded papers to her chest. She needed to get to her classroom to secure the thumb drive and run a preliminary diagnostic. As she rounded the corner toward the history wing, she nearly collided with someone. "Whoa!" "Sorry, Ms. Jenkins," a voice said. Sarah stepped back, her heart rate steadying instantly. It was Leo, a junior in her AP European history class. Leo was brilliant, easily the smartest kid in the school, but notoriously rebellious. He spent more time in detention for bypassing the school's internet firewalls than he did studying, yet he consistently aced every exam. "It is quite all right, Leo," Sarah said, her voice soft, adopting the slight waver she used for her teacher persona. "What are you doing here so late?" Leo shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the stairwell that led up toward the roof access. He was clutching a heavy, black backpack. "Just, finishing up a project in the library." Lost track of time. Sarah's eyes locked onto his hands. His knuckles were smeared with dark, greasy dust. Tar dust. The same dust that coated the roof. "The library is in the opposite direction, Leo," she noted mildly. "Yeah, I took the long way. Needed to stretch my legs. Have a good night, Ms. Jenkins." He quickly sidestepped her and hurried down the hall, his sneakers squeaking loudly on the linoleum. Sarah watched him go. Leo wasn't just wandering. He had been near the roof. Was he working with Davis, or was he running his own operation? The boy was a skilled hacker. Perhaps he was the one processing the encrypted data Davis was collecting. She entered her classroom, locked the door, and closed the blinds. The room was dark, smelling of chalk dust and old paper. She moved to her desk, bypassing the standard school-issued desktop computer. Instead, she reached underneath the desk, unlatching a hidden compartment she had built during her first week. She pulled out a sleek, ruggedized laptop, entirely disconnected from the school's network. She booted the machine, running it through a localized, secure operating system. She inserted the encrypted thumb drive. Instantly, the screen flashed red, demanding a complex cryptographic key. It was AES 256 encryption, layered with a custom algorithmic lock. Military grade. Sarah cracked her knuckles, a small, grim smile touching her lips. The quiet life was officially over. She opened a decryption suite she hadn't touched in 5 years, her fingers flying across the keyboard in a blur of motion. She didn't know what secrets Oak Creek High was hiding, but she was going to tear them out into the light, piece by piece. The decryption software hummed silently on Sarah's ruggedized laptop, lines of green code scrolling furiously across the black screen. The custom algorithm protecting the thumb drive was robust, a self-mutating cipher that actively fought back against brute force attacks. Sarah watched it work, recognizing the signature of the code. It was a variation of a protocol used by private military contractors in the Middle East, designed to wipe the drive if tampered with improperly. She had set up a containment sandbox to prevent the self-destruct sequence, but cracking it would take hours. She couldn't afford to sit in her dark classroom all night. Her cover relied on absolute normalcy. Ms. Jenkins would go home, grade papers, and perhaps watch a documentary on the Romanovs. She closed the laptop, returning it to its hidden carriage beneath her desk, and secured the thumb drive in a lead-lined pouch inside her purse. The next morning, Oak Creek High was buzzing with a frantic, nervous energy that had nothing to do with the upcoming midterms. As Sarah walked through the main doors, clutching her thermos of Earl Grey tea, she immediately sensed the shift in the atmosphere. The security guards, usually lethargic and distracted, were standing at strict attention near the metal detectors. She navigated the crowded hallway toward the faculty lounge. Just as she reached the door, she saw Principal Miller, a man whose face was perpetually flushed with stress, marching down the hall. Beside him was Mr. Davis, the counselor, wearing a deep maroon sweater and an expression of grave concern. Trailing behind them, flanked by 2 oversized security guards, was Leo. The boy looked pale, his usual rebellious smirk replaced by genuine fear. His heavy black backpack was clutched tightly against his chest. Sarah stepped back, allowing the procession to pass. She caught a snippet of their conversation. "We found the tools in your locker, Leo," Davis was saying, his voice a soothing yet firm purr. "You need to be honest with us. Hacking the school's firewall is one thing, but attempting to breach the administrative wing's physical security is a criminal offense." "I didn't break into anything," Leo protested, his voice cracking. "Someone put those lockpicks in my bag. I swear." Principal Miller shook his head, looking disappointed. "My office to the right, gentlemen. We're calling the police." Sarah's blood ran cold. Lockpicks. They were framing the kid. Davis must have realized the roof had been compromised or that he had dropped the drive. He needed a scapegoat, someone with a known history of behavioral issues and the technical aptitude to make a break-in look plausible. Leo was the perfect target. She entered the faculty lounge, her mind working furiously. She couldn't intervene directly without exposing her own capabilities and blowing her cover. A quiet history teacher wouldn't know how to identify planted lockpicks or challenge a counselor's assessment of a student's guilt. She needed to manipulate the situation from the shadows. She poured a cup of stale coffee she had no intention of drinking and sat at a corner table, listening to the gossip of the other teachers. "Did you see Leo?" whispered Mrs. Gable, the librarian. "Hank found him this morning lurking near the basement stairwell. Said the boy had a whole burglary kit." Hank, the head security guard, a large, gruff man who spent most of his time watching sports on his phone in the monitor room. If Hank had found the tools, he was either wildly incompetent and easily manipulated by Davis, or he was complicit. Sarah left her untouched coffee and made her way toward the administrative wing. The hallway outside the principal's office was empty, save for Hank, who was leaning against the wall, chewing aggressively on a toothpick. He looked nervous, his eyes darting up and down the corridor. Sarah approached him, adopting a posture of nervous hesitation. "Excuse me, Hank. I heard about Leo. Is it true? Are the police coming?" Hank puffed out his chest, trying to look authoritative. "Yeah, Ms. Jenkins. Caught the little punk red-handed. Had professional lockpicks and everything. Davis is in there talking to him and Miller now." "That is so troubling," Sarah said softly, adjusting her glasses. "You know, he is in my AP history class. He is a brilliant boy, but easily distracted. Where exactly did you find these tools?" "In his backpack, right outside the boiler room down in the basement," Hank said, puffing up slightly at the chance to play the hero. "I was doing my morning rounds, saw him acting sketchy, demanded to search his bag. Boom. Crime tools." Sarah's analytical mind immediately flagged the inconsistency. Last night, Leo was on the 4th floor, near the roof access. This morning, Hank claims he caught him near the basement. If Davis was operating from the roof, what was in the basement? "The boiler room?" Sarah murmured, looking confused. "Why on earth would a student want to go down there? It's just dust and old pipes." Hank's eyes flashed with a sudden, momentary panic. He shifted his weight, crossing his arms defensively. "Kids do stupid things, Ms. Jenkins. Looking for a place to skip class, probably. Anyway, it's police business now." "Of course," Sarah said, retreating a step. "Thank you, Hank. I worry about him." She turned and walked away, her mind locking onto the new target. The basement. Davis had framed Leo by placing the tools near the boiler room. It wasn't just to get the boy in trouble. It was a diversion. It was an intentional misdirection to keep the administration focused on the student, while subtly warning everyone else that the basement was off limits. Davis was watching the principal from the roof. But whatever he was protecting, whatever the core of his operation was, it was buried underground. Sarah checked her watch. She had a free period. It was time to explore the dark underbelly of Oak Creek High, and she wasn't going to need permission to enter. The descent into the basement of Oak Creek High was like stepping back into the Cold War era. The pristine linoleum and brightly lit classrooms gave way to cracked concrete floors, exposed, hissing steam pipes, and the heavy metallic scent of rust and old standing water. The fluorescent bulbs down here were spaced far apart, casting long, menacing shadows across the subterranean labyrinth. Sarah moved with absolute silence, her rubber-soled shoes making no sound against the concrete. She bypassed the main boiler room where Hank claimed to have caught Leo. It was a dead end, filled with massive ancient iron furnaces that clearly hadn't been fired up in decades. If Davis was using the basement, It wouldn't be in the obvious maintenance areas. She needed to find the blind spots. To do that, she had to understand the school's security network. Earlier that morning, during the commotion with Leo, she had smoothly lifted Hank's master keycard from his belt loop and replaced it with a perfectly weighted counterfeit she carried for just such an occasion. She navigated a narrow, twisting corridor that ran beneath the old gymnasium. According to the original architectural blueprints she had memorized years ago, a standard precaution for any operative settling into a new location, this area housed old fallout shelters from the 1960s. The school administration had officially sealed them off in the 90s due to asbestos concerns. She reached a heavy, steel-reinforced door marked with a faded, yellow hazard sign. A modern, magnetic lock had been retrofitted onto the ancient frame. A red LED glowed angrily above the handle. This wasn't standard school security. This was a high-grade maglock, capable of holding thousands of pounds of force. Sarah didn't bother with the card reader. A system this secure would log every entry attempt. She knelt, examining the wiring conduit that ran from the card reader up into the drop ceiling. It was sloppy. The installer had used standard electrical tape instead of heat-shrink tubing. She reached into her pocket, retrieving a small, cylindrical device that looked like a thick permanent marker. It was a high-voltage EMP emitter, designed to deliver a localized burst of electromagnetic energy to short out unshielded electronics. She pressed the tip against the exposed wiring conduit and pressed the button hidden under the cap. There was a sharp snap, a spark of blue light, and the red LED on the lock died. The heavy magnetic seal disengaged with a dull thud. Sarah pulled the door open, slipping inside and letting it close softly behind her. The darkness was absolute. She bypassed her phone's flashlight, too bright, too uncontrolled, and withdrew a small tactical penlight, clicking it to a low-intensity red beam. Red light preserved night vision and was harder to spot from a distance. The beam swept across the room. It wasn't an abandoned fallout shelter anymore. It was a fully operational, subterranean command center. The damp, concrete walls had been lined with acoustic dampening foam. In the center of the room sat a bank of high-end server racks, their cooling fans humming a low, steady bassline. Tangled webs of Cat6 cables ran from the servers to a large, multi-monitor workstation. Sarah approached the workstation. The screens were locked, but they weren't displaying a standard screensaver. They were displaying a live feed of the school's security cameras. But it wasn't the feed Hank saw in the monitor room. These screens showed the hidden cameras. Sarah recognized the angles. There was a camera hidden in the smoke detector of the faculty lounge. Another was tucked into the ventilation grate in the principal's office, providing a secondary angle to the roof sniper's nest. There were feeds covering the locker rooms, the counselors' offices, and even the exterior parking lots. It was a total surveillance blanket, entirely independent of the school's official system. She analyzed the desk. There were no personal items, no coffee mugs, no notes. It was sterile, professional. But beside the keyboard rested a thick, manila folder. Sarah opened it. Inside were printed dossiers. They weren't student records. They were deeply intrusive, highly illegal background investigations on the school's faculty and the town's local officials. She flipped through the pages. There was a file on Principal Miller, detailing his crippling gambling debts and a secret second mortgage. There was a file on the town's mayor, showing photographic evidence of an illicit affair. There was even a file on Hank the security guard, revealing his past involvement in a petty theft ring before he was hired at the school. This wasn't just surveillance. This was an extortion ring. Davis wasn't spying on the school to protect it. He was gathering blackmail material to control the administration and the town's leadership. Sarah's eyes fell upon a final dossier at the bottom of the stack. It was thinner than the rest. The tab read, Jenkins, Sarah. Her blood turned to ice. She flipped it open. It contained her fake background, her fabricated employment history. But scrawled in red ink across the bottom of the page, in Davis's precise handwriting, was a single, terrifying sentence. Asterisk cover story holds, but physical movements suggest military/tactical background. Monitor closely. Asterisk. She hadn't been as invisible as she thought. Davis suspected her. The incident with Leo wasn't just a diversion to protect the basement. It was a test to see how the staff reacted. Suddenly, the red beam of her penlight caught a subtle movement on the main monitor. It was the feed from the hallway right outside the steel door she had just breached. The camera, hidden in an old light fixture, showed a figure approaching rapidly. It was Davis, and he was holding a suppressed pistol. He had known the moment the lock was bypassed. The EMP hadn't just opened the door, it had tripped a silent alarm. Sarah was trapped in a subterranean bunker with a highly trained, armed operative bearing down on her. The quiet teacher persona was dead. It was time to go to war. The heavy steel door of the fallout shelter remained shut, but Sarah knew it was only a matter of seconds before Davis breached it. The silenced pistol in his hand on the monitor feed meant he wasn't coming in to issue a detention. He was coming in to eliminate a compromised asset. Sarah's mind instantly shifted into combat geometry. She killed the red penlight, plunging the room back into absolute darkness, save for the faint, cold glow of the surveillance monitors. She couldn't fight him head-on in the doorway. He had the fatal funnel, the doorway itself, and a firearm. She needed to blind him, disorient him, and force him to fight on her terms. She moved rapidly to the server racks. She reached behind the main unit, her hands flying over the heavy power cables. She found the main breaker switch for the room's independent power supply. On the monitor, she saw Davis stop at the door. He examined the dead maglock. He raised the suppressed pistol, holding it close to his chest in a professional retention stance. He reached for the handle. Sarah yanked the breaker switch down. The servers died instantly. The monitors went black. The low hum of the cooling fans ceased, leaving a sudden, deafening silence in the dark room. The heavy door creaked open. A sliver of dim, yellow hallway light sliced into the pitch-black room. Davis stepped inside, a high-powered tactical flashlight mounted under the barrel of his pistol piercing the darkness. The blinding white beam swept across the room in sharp, controlled arcs, searching for a target. "I know you're in here," Davis's voice called out. It was no longer the soothing tone of a guidance counselor. It was flat, cold, and entirely devoid of emotion. "You tripped the fail-safe on the lock. Sophisticated. Who are you working for, Jenkins? You're not a teacher." Sarah didn't answer. She was crouched low, completely hidden behind the secondary row of server racks, clutching a heavy metal keyboard she had ripped from the workstation. It was a terrible weapon, but in close quarters, blunt force was effective. The flashlight beam cut through the air, inches above her head. Davis was moving slowly, clearing the room sector by sector, his footfalls utterly silent. He was well trained, a professional operator. "You found the files," Davis continued, his voice echoing slightly against the concrete walls. "That means you know what this is. This town, this school, it's a gold mine of corruption. Miller, the mayor, the police chief. They're all dirty. I'm just capitalizing on their sins. It's business. Don't make it personal." Sarah tracked his position by the ambient reflection of his flashlight. He was moving toward the workstation, drawn to the area she had last been standing. He passed her row of servers. His back was momentarily exposed. It was now or never. Sarah exploded from cover. She didn't scream or make a sound. She closed the distance in 2 rapid, silent strides. As Davis turned, startled by the sudden movement in his peripheral vision, Sarah swung the metal keyboard with terrifying velocity. She didn't aim for his head. He was wearing a tactical beanie that might soften the blow, and his hands would naturally come up to block. She aimed for the weapon hand. The heavy plastic and metal smashed into his wrist with a sickening crack. Davis grunted in pain, the flashlight beam jerking wildly toward the ceiling as his grip failed. The suppressed pistol clattered onto the concrete floor, sliding away into the darkness. But Davis was fast. Instead of reaching for the gun, he pivoted, lunging at Sarah with his left arm, aiming a vicious strike at her throat. Sarah deflected the blow with her forearm, twisting her body to use his momentum against him. She grabbed his jacket collar, driving her knee upward into his solar plexus. The air rushed out of his lungs in a sharp hiss. She tried to follow up with an elbow strike to his temple, but Davis recovered with shocking speed. He blocked the elbow, grabbed her shoulders, and drove her backward, slamming her violently against the steel casing of the server rack. Pain flared down Sarah's spine, but she ignored it, operating entirely on adrenaline and muscle memory. As Davis pinned her, reaching for a combat knife sheathed at his belt, Sarah dropped her center of gravity. She stomped hard on his instep, breaking his footing, and drove the palm of her hand upward, catching him squarely under the chin. His head snapped back. He stumbled backward, disoriented. Sarah didn't wait to see if he would recover. She didn't need to kill him. She needed to expose him. She lunged into the darkness where the pistol had fallen, her fingers brushing the cold metal. She scooped it up, rolling to her feet, bringing the weapon up and aiming it squarely at Davis's center of mass. "Don't move," Sarah commanded. Her voice was ice, holding the lethal authority of someone who had pulled the trigger many times before. Davis froze. He stood in the dim, ambient light spilling from the hallway, his chest heaving, blood trickling from his split chin. He looked at the gun in her hand, then up at her face, his eyes widening in realization. "Your stance," Davis breathed, a dark chuckle escaping his lips. "Weaver stance. Perfect trigger discipline. You're not just corporate security, are you? You're agency. What is a federal ghost doing teaching high school history?" "I ask the questions, Davis," Sarah said, keeping the sights locked on him. "Who is the buyer for the blackmail data? This isn't a solo operation. You're gathering intel for someone else." Davis smiled, exposing blood-stained teeth. "You think you've won because you have the gun? You're too late, Jenkins. The drop was made an hour ago. The files are gone. And Leo is already in police custody, taking the fall for all of it. If you shoot me, you're a murderer in a school basement. You don't exist, remember? You have no badge, no authority. He was right. If she fired, her cover was blown, her past would catch up to her, and the true mastermind would walk away with the data. Before Sarah could respond, the wail of police sirens pierced the silence above them, growing rapidly louder as multiple cruisers converged on Oak Creek High. The real authorities were here, and Sarah was holding an illegal, suppressed firearm in a secret bunker over a bleeding guidance counselor. The trap had just snapped shut. The wail of the police sirens cut through the thick concrete of the basement ceiling, a chaotic counterpoint to the tense, heavy silence between Sarah and Davis. Red and blue lights began to pulse faintly through the high, frosted glass security windows at ground level above them. The local police, completely unaware of the subterranean war, had arrived for Leo. "They're not here for me, Jenkins," Davis said, his voice regaining its smooth, mocking cadence despite the blood on his chin. "Miller called them for the kid. But if they sweep the building and find you down here with an unregistered, suppressed weapon, well, the headlines write themselves. Deranged teacher attacks beloved counselor in hidden school bunker." Sarah's mind calculated the variables with cold precision. Davis was right. The local PD would not understand the context. They would see a woman with no official jurisdiction holding a gun on an unarmed man. Her fabricated identity would crumble under a microscopic background check, exposing her not only to the authorities but to the enemies from her past she had spent 5 years hiding from. She couldn't shoot him, but she couldn't let him win. "You're right, Davis," Sarah said, her voice dropping into a deadly, hushed whisper. "I don't exist, which means I have absolutely nothing to lose by breaking both of your kneecaps and leaving you down here to bleed out before they find you." Davis's confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He saw the cold, unblinking intent in her eyes. He believed her. Sarah didn't lower the weapon. "You said the drop was made an hour ago. Where? Who took the files? You think I'm going to burn my buyer?" Davis scoffed, though he subtly shifted his weight backward. "It's a multi-million-dollar syndicate. They buy leverage. The land this school sits on, the city zoning permits, they want it all. They're going to bankrupt the district, force a sale, and turn Oak Creek into a commercial real estate goldmine. The blackmail just ensures the mayor and the principal vote the right way." "The buyer, Davis," Sarah repeated, stepping forward, pressing the cold suppressor against the center of his chest. "Name." "I don't know his name," Davis snapped, genuine panic finally bleeding into his voice. "He uses a proxy, a courier. We use dead drops. The school is the perfect cover. Thousands of people in and out every day. Where was today's drop?" Davis hesitated, his eyes darting toward the open doorway. The heavy thud of police boots could now be heard on the main floor above, echoing down the concrete stairwells. They were searching the building. "The library," Davis rasped. "Section D, Nonfiction. History of the Soviet Union. Hollowed out encyclopedia. The courier picks it up during the morning community access hours." Sarah processed the information. If the courier picked it up an hour ago, the data was already moving. But the encrypted thumb drive she had taken from the roof last night was still in her purse upstairs. Davis hadn't realized it was missing yet. He thought the operation was perfectly intact. "Get on the ground," Sarah ordered, gesturing with the pistol. "Face down. Hands behind your head." Davis complied, lowering himself slowly to the damp concrete. "You can't stop this, Jenkins. The wheels are already turning." Sarah didn't waste breath arguing. She quickly retrieved a set of heavy-duty zip ties from her cardigan pocket, standard loadout for her everyday carry, and secured his wrists with brutal efficiency. She then tied his ankles and linked them to his wrists, hog-tying him completely. She picked up his discarded tactical flashlight and the suppressed pistol. She couldn't leave the weapon. It was evidence, but it was also a liability. She ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and field-stripped the weapon in under 4 seconds, scattering the slide, barrel, and spring across the dark corners of the bunker. She smashed the frame under the heel of her boot, rendering the gun utterly useless. "Enjoy the dark, counselor," she whispered. She sprinted out of the bunker, shutting the heavy steel door behind her and jamming a discarded piece of pipe through the exterior handle to ensure he couldn't push it open even if he broke the zip ties. She navigated the basement corridors, moving away from the main stairwell where the police were likely descending. She headed for the old service elevator shaft at the back of the building. The elevator had been out of service for 20 years, but the cables were still thick and greased. She forced the rusted doors open and leaped into the dark shaft, grabbing the heavy steel cables with her bare hands. Ignoring the burning friction, she hauled herself upward, floor by floor, relying on sheer upper body strength. She bypassed the first floor, continuing up to the second floor, directly near the library. She pried the second-floor elevator doors apart and squeezed through, rolling into the deserted hallway. The school was in lockdown mode. Teachers had locked their classroom doors, and the hallways were empty save for the distant static of police radios. She moved silently toward the library. The double-glass doors were locked. She used the bump key she kept hidden under her watch strap, popping the lock in seconds. The library was cavernous and silent, smelling of old paper and floor wax. She moved to Section D, Nonfiction. History. She found the Soviet Union section. Her eyes scanned the spines. There it was. A massive, outdated encyclopedia volume that looked slightly cleaner than the books surrounding it. She pulled it off the shelf. It was light. She opened the cover. The pages had been cut out, forming a perfect square cavity. Inside the cavity was a small, high-tech tracking device, blinking with a faint green light. It wasn't a data drive. It was a beacon. Sarah stared at the tracker, the horrifying realization washing over her. Davis hadn't been making a data drop. He had been leaving a breadcrumb trail. He wasn't the mastermind. He was just the bait. The tracker wasn't meant for the courier. It was meant to monitor whoever came looking for the drop. The Syndicate didn't just want the blackmail material. They wanted to know who was trying to stop them. The green light on the tracker suddenly turned solid red. It had detected her proximity. Behind her, the heavy glass doors of the library shattered into a million pieces. The explosive shattering of the library's reinforced glass doors echoed like a bomb blast through the cavernous room. Sarah didn't flinch, nor did she turn to look at the destruction. Her survival instincts, honed in hostile environments from Bogota to Beirut, took over entirely. She dropped the hollowed-out encyclopedia, leaving the red blinking tracker on the floor, and dove forward, rolling behind the massive, solid oak circulation desk. A hail of suppressed gunfire chewed through the air where she had been standing a microsecond before. High-caliber rounds ripped into the bookshelves, shredding encyclopedias and sending a snowstorm of torn paper and splintered wood cascading into the aisles. This wasn't the local police. The Oak Creek PD carried standard-issue 9mm sidearms, not fully automatic, suppressed submachine guns. The Syndicate had sent a clean-up crew. The tracker in the book was a tripwire, and she had just walked right into the kill zone. Sarah stayed low, pressing her back against the oak paneling of the desk. She took a slow, deep breath, steadying her pulse. She was unarmed, trapped in a room with limited exits, facing heavily armed professionals. It was a tactical nightmare, but she had survived worse. She peeked around the edge of the desk, using a small cosmetic mirror from her pocket to view the entrance without exposing her head. Two men were advancing through the shattered doorway. They moved with terrifying synchronicity, wearing unmarked black tactical gear, Kevlar vests, and ballistic face masks. They swept the room with the laser sights of their weapons, moving methodically down the center aisle. They were sweeping for a body, expecting the initial burst of fire to have hit their target. "Target is not down," one of the men rasped into a throat mic, his voice metallic and cold. "Deploying thermal." Sarah's eyes widened. Thermal imaging. Hiding behind the desk wouldn't save her. Her body heat would bloom on their visors like a flare in the dark. She needed to break their line of sight and disable their tech. She looked around the circulation desk. There was a computer monitor, a pile of return books, and a heavy industrial fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. She grabbed the fire extinguisher. She didn't pull the pin. Instead, she unspooled the heavy rubber hose. The men were halfway down the aisle, their weapons raised, scanning the heat signatures of the room. Sarah hurled a heavy hardcover book over the top of the desk toward the far corner of the library. Both mercenaries instantly pivoted toward the sound, their suppressed weapons spitting a deadly volley of fire into the empty corner, shredding a display on local history. In that split second of distraction, Sarah lunged from behind the desk. She didn't run away. She charged directly at them. She triggered the fire extinguisher, pointing the hose squarely at the advancing men. A massive, blinding cloud of thick, freezing white chemical foam erupted across the aisle, instantly filling the air with an opaque wall of fog. The sudden drop in temperature and the dense chemical cloud blinded their thermal optics, rendering their visors useless. The men cursed, firing blindly into the white foam, their bullets impacting harmlessly against the concrete pillars and book stacks. Sarah used the momentary chaos to close the distance. She burst through the chemical cloud, slipping beneath the blind fire of the lead mercenary. She drove the heavy metal base of the fire extinguisher directly into his kneecap. The man collapsed with a sharp cry of pain, his weapon dropping. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed the barrel of his falling submachine gun, twisting it violently to snap the sling off his shoulder, and delivered a brutal strike to his throat with the stock of the weapon. He went limp, collapsing onto the floor. The second mercenary spun around, firing blindly into the foam, tracking the sound of the scuffle. Bullets tore past Sarah's face, close enough that she felt the sonic crack against her cheek. She hit the ground, sliding across the polished floor wax, bringing the captured submachine gun up. She didn't fire. The noise would draw the police outside directly to her location. Instead, she threw the heavy, empty fire extinguisher at his legs. It clipped his shin, causing him to stumble. Sarah launched herself upward, tackling him around the waist. They crashed violently into a bookshelf, bringing an avalanche of heavy biographies down upon them. The mercenary was significantly larger and stronger. He threw Sarah off him with a savage shove, raising his weapon. Sarah rolled backward, fluidly coming up into a crouch. Her hand whipped out, grabbing a heavy brass bookend shaped like a globe from the floor. As the mercenary leveled his gun, Sarah hurled the brass globe with terrifying accuracy. It struck him squarely in the center of his ballistic face mask. The mask held, but the sheer blunt force trauma snapped his head back, disorienting him. Sarah closed the gap instantly. She delivered a devastating palm strike to his solar plexus, followed by a sweeping kick to his ankle that took him off his feet. As he hit the ground, she drove her knee into his chest, pinning him, and ripped the mask from his face. She didn't recognize him. He was a professional ghost, an anonymous contractor. "Who sent you?" Sarah demanded, pressing her forearm against his throat, cutting off his air supply. "Who is the buyer?" The man choked, his eyes rolling back, but he offered a bloody grin. "You're too late, teacher. The real package is already upstairs." Sarah froze. The real package? If the files in the basement were a distraction, and the drop in the library was a trap, what was the actual target? Suddenly, a voice boomed over the school's public address system. It wasn't the principal. It was a voice she recognized from the encrypted files she had decrypted earlier. It was the icy, calculated tone of a man who owned senators and destroyed corporations. "Attention, Oak Creek High," the voice echoed through the destroyed library. "We have the school surrounded. The police outside are currently receiving orders to stand down. Ms. Jenkins, or whoever you truly are, please bring the encrypted drive to the principal's office. If you do not arrive in 3 minutes, I will instruct my men to begin executing the students trapped in the gymnasium. The clock is ticking." The game had completely changed. This wasn't about blackmail anymore. It was a hostage situation, and she was the only one who could stop a massacre. The chilling announcement echoing through the PA system froze the blood in Sarah's veins. The Syndicate wasn't just after the blackmail files. They were after the encrypted thumb drive she had recovered from the roof, the drive currently sitting safely in her locked classroom. The files Davis had collected were merely local leverage. The drive, however, held something far more dangerous. It held the Syndicate's entire digital infrastructure, the routing numbers for their offshore accounts, and the identities of their deep cover proxies. She released her grip on the unconscious mercenary, her mind racing. The police outside had been ordered to stand down. That meant the Syndicate had federal-level pull. They had jammed the local dispatch or threatened the precinct directly. The school was completely isolated, transformed into a heavily armed fortress with hundreds of innocent students trapped inside the gymnasium. 3 minutes, she muttered, checking the shattered face of the mercenary's tactical watch. She stripped the downed men of their spare magazines, a tactical folding knife, and a small encrypted radio. She secured the captured submachine gun, checking the chamber. It was fully loaded. She wasn't Ms. Jenkins anymore. She was a weapon, uncaged and operating on purely lethal parameters. She bolted from the library, sprinting down the hallway toward the central stairwell. She had to retrieve the drive from her classroom on the 3rd floor before heading to the principal's office on the main level. The school was terrifyingly silent. The classrooms she passed were locked, dark, with terrified students and teachers huddled away from the windows. She moved with ruthless efficiency, clearing corners with the muzzle of her weapon, her senses dialed to maximum sensitivity. She reached the third floor. The hallway outside her classroom was empty. She approached the door, slipped her bump key into the lock, and pushed it open. The room had been tossed. Desks were overturned, textbooks shredded, maps ripped from the walls. They had already been here. They had searched for the drive. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She moved to her desk. The hidden compartment underneath had been violently pried open. The heavy steel casing was bent, the lock shattered. Her ruggedized laptop was gone, and the lead-lined pouch containing the encrypted thumb drive was missing. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to break her concentration. If they already had the drive, why did the man on the PA system demand she bring it to the principal's office? She analyzed the destruction. The entry into the hidden compartment was brutal, amateurish. It wasn't the precise work of the mercenaries downstairs. It was done with a heavy pry bar. Someone else had beaten the Syndicate to the drive. Someone who knew about her hidden compartment. Leo. The kid had been near the roof, near the basement. He was a hacker, a tech genius. He must have seen her hide the laptop and the drive, or deduced its location. He had broken into her room while the school was in lockdown, stolen the drive, and was now loose in the building with a target on his back. The radio she had taken from the mercenary crackled to life in her ear. "Command, this is Viper 2. We have a visual on the secondary target. The student. He's moving through the ventilation shafts above the cafeteria, requesting permission to engage." "Negative, Viper 2. The cold voice from the PA replied over the comms. "The boy has the asset. If you kill him in the shafts, we lose the drive in the ductwork. Flush him out toward the administrative wing. Let him bring it to us." They were hunting Leo, and they were herding him straight to the principal's office. Sarah checked the time. 1 minute and 40 seconds left. She abandoned the destroyed classroom and ran toward the cafeteria wing. She didn't have time to navigate the hallways. She needed to intercept Leo before the mercenaries forced him into the kill box. She reached the cafeteria. It was a massive, open space, utterly vulnerable. She looked up at the massive aluminum ventilation ducts suspended from the ceiling. She heard a faint metallic clatter from inside the central duct. "Leo!" she hissed, trying to project her voice upward without echoing. The clattering stopped. Suddenly, a grate 20 feet above her burst open. A heavy, black backpack plummeted to the ground, hitting the linoleum with a heavy thud. A second later, Leo dropped from the ceiling, hanging by his hands before letting go. He landed awkwardly, rolling to absorb the fall, looking terrified and exhausted. Sarah rushed to him, grabbing him by the collar and dragging him behind the heavy stainless steel serving counters, just as a spray of suppressed gunfire shattered the cafeteria windows above them. "Ms. Jenkins!" Leo gasped, staring at the submachine gun in her hands, his eyes wide with absolute shock. What is happening? Why do you have a gun?" "There is no time to explain, Leo," Sarah said, her voice entirely devoid of her usual soft cadence. "You stole the drive from my classroom." Leo swallowed hard, nodding frantically. I knew you were looking into Davis. I saw you on the roof. I hacked the school's firewall to try and find what he was hiding, but his encryption was too good. When the lockdown happened, I knew they were coming for the data. I took it to keep it safe. I thought you were in danger. He unzipped the backpack. Inside, nestled between AP Physics textbooks, was her ruggedized laptop and the encrypted thumb drive. You did well, Leo, Sarah said, her tone softening slightly. But you've put a massive target on your back. We have less than a minute. If we don't deliver this to the principal's office, they're going to start hurting people. So we give it to them? Leo asked, terrified. No, Sarah said, her eyes narrowing as a dangerous, brilliant plan formed in her mind. We are going to give them exactly what they asked for. But we are going to make sure they regret asking. She grabbed her laptop, opened it, and inserted the thumb drive. She had 1 minute to rewrite the rules of engagement. The cafeteria of Oak Creek High was eerily silent, save for the frantic, muted clicking of Sarah's fingers flying across the keyboard of her ruggedized laptop. She crouched behind the stainless steel serving counter, the cold metal pressing into her back, while Leo watched her with a mixture of terror and absolute awe. What are you doing? Leo whispered, his eyes darting toward the shattered windows where the mercenaries were undoubtedly regrouping. I am giving them the drive, Sarah replied, her voice steady, eyes locked on the screen. But I'm ensuring the data they get is extremely toxic. She wasn't decrypting the drive. She didn't have the time or the complete cipher. Instead, she was wrapping the encrypted payload in a vicious, highly aggressive Trojan horse. It was a piece of malware she had developed years ago, a digital parasite designed to lay dormant until it was plugged into a secure network. Once connected, it would rapidly burrow past any firewall, reverse the connection, and systematically destroy the host system from the inside out while broadcasting their server locations to every federal cybersecurity agency on the eastern seaboard. 30 seconds, she muttered, watching the progress bar crawl toward 100%. Ms. Jenkins, Leo said, his voice trembling. Who are you? Truly. Sarah paused for a fraction of a second, her fingers hovering over the enter key. She looked at the terrified teenager who had risked his life to protect what he thought was right. I'm a history teacher, Leo. But before that, I made sure history didn't happen to innocent people. And right now, we are going to teach these men a very painful lesson. The progress bar hit 100. The payload was primed. She yanked the thumb drive from the port and shoved the laptop back into Leo's bag. Listen to me carefully, Sarah commanded, locking eyes with him. You are going to take this bag and crawl back into the ventilation shaft. You do not come out, you do not make a sound, until you hear police sirens right outside the building. Real police, not these contractors. Do you understand? Leo nodded, his jaw set in a determined line. He scrambled up the serving counter, using a stack of trays to boost himself back into the open ductwork. He disappeared into the darkness, the grate sliding silently back into place. Sarah stood up, the submachine gun hanging on a tight sling against her chest. She gripped the encrypted thumb drive in her left hand. She checked her watch. Time was up. She walked out from behind the counter, stepping into the main corridor. She didn't attempt to hide. She walked with deliberate, heavy steps, projecting an aura of absolute, terrifying confidence. She was walking into the lion's den, but she was bringing the fire with her. She reached the administrative wing. The heavy oak doors of the principal's office were wide open. The interior was completely trashed. File cabinets were overturned, papers scattered like snow across the carpet. Standing in the center of the room was Principal Miller. He looked completely broken, his tie undone, sweat pouring down his face. He was being held at gunpoint by a man wearing a bespoke, incredibly expensive suit that looked entirely out of place in a suburban high school. Flanking him were two more heavily armed mercenaries. The man in the suit smiled thinly as Sarah entered. He didn't look surprised by the weapon she carried. "Ms. Jenkins, I presume," the man said, his voice smooth, echoing the chilling tone from the PA system. "Or should I say, Agent Vance? Your file was buried exceptionally deep. It cost me a considerable sum to unearth it. I am Marcus Thorne. I represent the syndicate you've been so rudely interfering with." Sarah didn't flinch at the mention of her true name. She kept her weapon lowered but ready, her eyes scanning the room, calculating trajectories and angles. "You have the drive," Thorne observed, eyeing the small silver device in her hand. "Excellent. Place it on the desk. Slowly. And perhaps I will let the children in the gym live to see tomorrow." "The drive contains your offshore routing numbers, Thorne," Sarah said coldly. "And the blackmail files Davis collected. It's the key to your entire operation in this state." "It is," Thorne agreed pleasantly. "Which is why I cannot leave without it. This town is a massive logistical hub for us. The school is the perfect staging ground. Once we bankrupt the district using the leverage on Miller here, we buy the land for pennies. But you know all this. The drive, please." Principal Miller let out a pathetic sob. "Sarah, please, just give it to them. They'll kill everyone." Sarah stepped forward. She didn't look at Miller. She looked directly into Thorne's eyes, projecting a calm that was entirely lethal. "You want the drive, Thorne?" Sarah said, holding it up. "Take it." She tossed the drive onto the polished mahogany desk. It clattered loudly, coming to rest near a sleek, silver laptop that Thorne had set up, undoubtedly a secure terminal connected directly to the Syndicate's mainframe, ready to verify the data. Thorne gestured to one of his mercenaries. The man stepped forward, picked up the drive, and inserted it into the laptop. "Verify the encryption signature," Thorne ordered. Sarah tightened her grip on the submachine gun. She had exactly 3 seconds before the Trojan activated. 3 seconds to end the standoff. "Signature verified, sir," the mercenary said, looking at the screen. "It's the primary payload. Initiating decrypt." The mercenary paused. A frown creased his forehead beneath his mask. "Sir, the system is lagging. We have a massive data spike." Thorne's smug smile vanished. "What do you mean?" "Sir, the firewall is collapsing," the mercenary said, panic suddenly lacing his voice. "We're being flooded. It's a reverse shell. It's uploading our entire localized server directory to the open web. It's sending a ping to Quantico." Thorne looked up at Sarah, his eyes wide with sudden, absolute fury. "Kill her!" he screamed. But Sarah was already moving. The Trojan had bought her the distraction she needed. The final act had begun. The command to kill had barely left Thorne's lips when Sarah exploded into motion. She didn't try to outshoot 3 heavily armed men in a confined space. Instead, she exploited the chaos her digital trap had created. As the mercenary at the laptop lunged for his weapon, Sarah swept her submachine gun upward, firing a controlled, deafening burst directly into the ceiling above them. The heavy 9mm rounds shredded the acoustic tiles, instantly severing the main water pipe feeding the building's fire suppression system. A torrential downpour of foul, pressurized black water erupted into the office, completely blinding the room and soaking the expensive electronics. The laptop on the desk sparked violently, emitting a cloud of acrid blue smoke before dying completely, permanently sealing the Trojan deep within the Syndicate's mainframe. "Blind fire!" one of the mercenaries shouted, the sound muffled by the roaring water. Sarah dropped to the floor, sliding across the saturated carpet. The mercenaries fired wildly into the deluge, the muzzle flashes illuminating the chaotic waterlogged room in stroboscopic bursts. She bypassed the 2 armed men entirely, using the cover of the artificial storm to close the distance on Thorne. He was stumbling backward, his expensive suit ruined, frantically pulling a small, silver derringer from his ankle holster. Sarah rose from the darkness like a ghost. She gripped the barrel of his small gun, twisting his wrist with a brutal, snapping motion that forced him to drop the weapon. Before he could scream, she drove her knee into his stomach, wrapping her arm around his neck and dragging him backward, using his body as a human shield against his own men. "Cease fire!" Sarah roared over the sound of the rushing water, pressing the muzzle of her weapon against Thorne's temple. "Drop your weapons or your boss loses his head." The 2 mercenaries froze. They could barely see through the pouring water, but the sight of their employer held hostage was clear enough. They slowly lowered their weapons, the suppressed submachine guns splashing into the growing puddle on the floor. "You're dead, Vance," Thorne spat, coughing up water, his voice strained against her chokehold. "You think destroying 1 terminal stops us? You think exposing our servers matters? We own people everywhere." "You don't own me," Sarah whispered coldly into his ear. "And right now, every federal agency in the country has your server logs, your proxy names, and the GPS coordinates of this exact room. You aren't a ghost anymore, Thorne. You're a target." As if on cue, a massive concussive boom shook the entire building. The front doors of the school had been breached, but it wasn't the local, corrupt police force. Over the roaring water, the heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots echoed down the hallway, accompanied by the sharp, authoritative shouts of federal tactical teams. The ping to Quantico had worked. The real cavalry had arrived. "FBI, drop your weapons. Hands in the air." Heavily armored federal agents poured into the principal's office, sweeping the room with tactical lights. They quickly secured the 2 surrendered mercenaries, zip-tying them face down in the water. Sarah slowly released Thorne, shoving him forward toward the agents. She lowered her weapon, placing it carefully on the desk beside the ruined laptop, and raised her hands, stepping back into the shadows of the room. A senior agent, wearing a tactical vest emblazoned with the FBI insignia, approached her. He looked at the chaos, the destroyed tech, and the soaking wet, bloodied Syndicate boss. Then he looked at Sarah, recognizing the perfectly calm, controlled posture of a fellow operator. "Agent Vance," the man said softly, recognizing her file. "We've been looking for you for a long time. You made a hell of a mess." "The mess was already here, Agent," Sarah replied, her voice returning to the calm, steady tone of Ms. Jenkins. "I just turned on the lights." 3 days later, Oak Creek High was eerily quiet, closed indefinitely while federal investigators tore through the building, unearthing the full extent of the syndicate's rot. The corrupt mayor had been arrested, Principal Miller was in custody turning state's evidence, and Davis, the counselor, was facing a lifetime in federal prison for extortion and espionage. Sarah stood near the edge of the school grounds, wrapped in a warm coat, watching the FBI crime scene vans idle in the parking lot. Her cover was completely blown. The quiet life of Ms. Jenkins was over, swept away in a tide of violence and exposure. She would have to disappear again, find a new name, a new town. "Ms. Jenkins." She turned to see Leo running toward her, a heavy duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He looked exhausted but unharmed. The feds had debriefed him, realizing he was a vital asset who had helped secure the data, not a criminal. "Leo," Sarah said, a genuine, rare smile touching her lips. "I thought you'd be home resting." "I had to make sure you were okay," Leo said, catching his breath. He looked at her, his expression a mix of respect and awe. Are you leaving?" "I have to," Sarah nodded. "My work here is done, and it's no longer safe for me to stay." Leo reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, heavy object. He handed it to her. It was the cold, brass 9mm casing she had found on the roof days ago. "I kept it," Leo said quietly. "A souvenir. To remind me that sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous." Sarah took the casing, rolling the cold brass between her fingers. She looked at the incredibly smart, brave kid who had stood against a syndicate. "Keep hacking the firewalls, Leo," Sarah said softly, turning to walk away into the brisk autumn wind. "The world needs people who know how to find the hidden things." As she walked away, the weight of her past settling comfortably back onto her shoulders, she didn't feel the sting of losing her quiet life. She felt the sharp, familiar thrill of the hunt. The syndicate was vast, and they knew she was alive. But as she slipped the brass casing into her pocket, she knew one thing for certain. They should be the ones running.